Welcome. Welcome to everybody. It's great to have such a large turnout. And my role here is simply to say, do it, which is clerk. It's the most incredible experience. You're going to do many things in your life. You're going to decide who you're going to date, marry, partner. You're going to decide what movie you go to. You're going to decide where you're going to live. What sort of career you're going to pursue. And you can argue all sides of all those questions about what you should do. In terms of both the personal, the professional benefits of clerking, I don't think there's very many arguments. That is, it is simply something that is rewarding, fun, and professionally positive on every level. And the purpose of today's meeting is to, in a sense, give you background about all of those issues, the value of clerking, the benefits of it, and the mechanics of it. Obviously, there'll be other sessions that we hold at the law school, which will fill in a lot of these details. But the purpose really here is to give you an overview about all that you should be thinking about. Now, just to back up, we have over the last 5-10 years really put a lot of resources and efforts at the law school to support students in clerking, and that means administratively, Chris Fritton in the career planning office sits down and provides all sorts of administrative support on a whole lot of different levels. It means talking with the faculty and making sure they will both advise and assist students in applying for clerkships. It means getting us institutionally working with students and working with the people who employ our students in clerkships, getting everybody on the same page. And the benefits have been clear. Over the last 5 years or so, the number of our students and graduates who've been clerking has gone way up. So this past year, it was roughly 84 people who were clerking, which, I mean, there's some double coverage here, but that's the equivalent of a third of a class at the law school. And my view is, quite candidly, that everybody should clerk, because I think no matter what you do, it's a rewarding experience. So we have a lot of people who are going to speak today, and I don't want to sort of steal any of their thunder, but the topics we do want to cover is not only why you should clerk, but the pros and cons of clerking at different levels, how to improve your position in getting a clerkship, how you can afford to clerk, and what a little bit of the mechanics in terms of clerking. But just to give you sort of my personal reasons for clerking, I clerked. It was certainly, I've never had a more rewarding professional experience. I clerked on the Third Circuit for Judge Higginbotham, whose picture is when you enter the Levy Conference Center. And the reason, you can break it down about what's sort of valuable about clerking, but to put it in a nutshell, there are almost no jobs left in the world in any profession or career where you can start out on top. That you can be working with somebody who is at the top of the profession, at the highest form of the profession, and learn from them and create sort of a relationship with them. In my particular case, the judge for my clerk taught me so much about the crafting and writing, about how to be a high-level professional, made me part of a network of clerks, which I've been connected to ever since. One was a cabinet secretary, one was a member of Congress. It creates a group of people with whom you have some relationship with the rest of your life. It also provides you with a credential, and you will be likely during your careers moving to lots of different positions. And what a clerkship does is give you a sort of a stamp in whatever position you move to down the line. So it really is something that I would recommend on almost every level in whatever type of career you decide. Now, a lot of people ask whether it matters whether you're going to be a litigator, whether you're going to be advising or maybe even you're going to leave the law. My personal view is that it is something that is extremely valuable no matter what area you go into, whether it's in litigating in court, going into corporate law, working in a sort of administrative nonprofit capacity. Whatever you do, it teaches you abilities of working with other people in terms of writing. It gives you a picture of the profession at a fairly high level right when you come out of your law school experience. So as you can see, I'm a firm believer in everybody clerking. And I should say all Penn students really should be in a position to clerk. The only recommendation I would say about clerking is you should view it as 1 year experience, maybe 2 years, and you should think broadly geographically. It's really a wonderful time to think about going off and going, maybe it's to, if you're from LA, maybe it's staying on the East Coast. If you're not from LA, it may be going out to LA or the Chicago or Arizona or South Dakota. But it is, in that regard, a way to think broadly about where you want to be. So, again, throughout your time here at the law school, whether you're a first-year student, second year, third year student thinking about applying for after when you graduate, we are here administratively for you. We want to support you in every way we can. So you should be attending future sessions as well as talking to people on the clerkship committee and otherwise. We have some graduates who are clerking now who are going to speak, as well as the co-chairs of our clerkship committee who will talk about the values of clerking. And with this, I will turn it over to Professor Christopher Yu, who has, as you can guess, for any of you who know Christopher Yu, a point-by-point explanation in Technicolor about why you should clerk. Christopher.
Well, thank you all for coming. Let's see. Yeah. You want me to?
I'll put it up there for you.
That's all right. No, I'll take care of it.
Okay.
I just realized I have the wrong setup. I cannot disagree with my dean. Well, I can. It's just not a very good idea. It is a fantastic opportunity, and it's one to which everyone, we believe, should take advantage of. What's going on here? So the question becomes, what is a clerkship, and why should I do one? And so that's what my mission is here today to talk to you about. All right. Okay. So, as the dean says, I'm not. When I was in your position, I wanted to. Let's see. Why is this not coming on? Yeah, good. Okay. It was all off. All right. So this is, I will give it to you as straight as I know how. I always hate the advice, like, well, should I clerk? Well, it depends. And it's like, well, that's very nice. Depends on what. And so I try to give it, dole it out, give you the information that I wish that I would have had when I was in your position. And what I guess, what the first question is, what is a clerkship? A clerkship is a short-term position as a legal assistant to a judge. And so you sit in their chambers. Actually, if you look at the staff manuals, there's a distinction between clerks that work in the clerk's office. These are called, in the official staff manual, called elbow clerks. Why? Because you sit at the elbow of a judge. You will see their good days, their bad days, live through their practice, work with them on opinions, different sorts of things. Can be for 1 or 2 years, can be at the federal or state level. And there's a whole variety of types of clerkships. Trial, appellate, and also there's a number of specialized courts that people often overlook. The Court of International Trade, the tax court. Many people are looking at certain kinds of careers, go to probate courts. I was actually just talking to a student who's looking for a career in advising people, individuals. They're fantastic opportunities. And the other thing that's often overlooked is judges, when they hit a certain level, can take senior status. Many people shy away from them. frankly, most senior judges do everything that active judges do. They simply do it so they can get actually more control over their docket, sometimes sit by designation in other courts, which actually enhances the clerkship. And then, frankly, they're often more established than they were before. Typical activities, you actually advise them on a cases. A very typical thing is you write a bench memo for you. There are 3 clerks in the chambers. You write a bench memo for cases, major motions, different sorts of things. You talk about it with their judge. You can also do initial drafts of opinions. Different judges vary in practice, but predominantly judges will do that. But there's a whole bunch of things you'll see that you don't normally get exposure to, but which are the bread and butter of lawyering. We do moot court here for appellate arguments. Actually, most attorneys will appear in an appellate court a handful of times in their lives. The times you do status calls, motions practice, discovery, settlement negotiations, all these things are more and more predominantly what litigators do every day. But also there's a bunch of other things that judges do that fly below the radar. They often have administrative assignments. Some are designated the chief judge. Many sit in capacities with the administrative office of the courts. My own judge actually was part of what the Codes of Conduct Committee, advising judges about, they answer questions of whether something violated their ethical obligations. And one of those things, if they got clearance, they were allowed to go do it. There's a whole, they make speeches, they appear in public, they come judge moot courts, as they will do here. And they do all these different varieties of things that you do, and for example, there's the chance to have lunch with them, people go jogging with their judges, it just all varies in a great deal. So there's a tremendous richness of experiences. So why should you do this? The number one reason is the reason that the dean mentioned, which is it's an opportunity to be advised by a leading lawyer in the field. Put a different way, this may be the last time in your life that someone looks at your writing at the sentence level. And the kind of experience, experiencing how they think about the law is just an experience that I think all of us who've clerked absolutely treasure. As I talked about, there's a bunch of things we don't teach well in law school. And I don't mean to say our law school, this is true of all law schools. I'll give you a great example. The first trial that I would see end-to-end, I participate in end-to-end, will be the first time that's happened to me. And I've never seen voir dire. I've never seen how a jury is seated. If you clerk for a trial judge, you will see this over and over again. You'll see it done well, you'll see it done badly, and in fact, most litigators, most firm lawyers are actually afraid to try cases because they don't have the experience set to do it well. And this is a chance for you to dry run a great deal of these things, and frankly, to catch up on some of the things that that law schools as institutions don't teach particularly well. You'll do many more interesting things than the typical first-year associate. I mean, everyone thinks about this. The nasty little secret is a lot of them, all they do is memos and document review. Here you'll actually have real responsibility, and I think that it's a fantastic way to invest in your own experience bank and actually make it so that it sets up your career better. This is something that probably CP&P doesn't want me to tell you because it encourages procrastination. The typical graduate of this law school will begin seriously negotiating with employers fall of their third year. So let me ask, how many of you are 1Ls here? How many of you are 2Ls? Okay, so the 2Ls, you're talking about fall of 2012. The 1Ls, you're talking about fall of 2013. So let's take the 2Ls. Normally you do fall of 2012. Well, guess what? You get another summer out of this. And I actually used the experience to work for the Justice Department's Antitrust Division. It was a fantastic experience. If it taught me nothing else, then I never want to do that ever again. Because it's funny, these things, I teach antitrust, I love it. The practice of antitrust law was far different from what I thought it was. Invaluable experience to me. But what the reality was, if you clerk for a year, for those of you who graduate who are 2Ls, you'll graduate in 2013, and so you'll have bought another year in the fall of 2013, and frankly, you get until about the spring of 2014, because even firms who aren't actually hiring will almost always look at graduating clerks. So it's a way to buy about another summer's worth of experience and about 18 more months of procrastination time to actually experience what you want to do. Now, I don't encourage you to actually sit on that. I had a friend who did this and graduated, and they got to the end of it, they didn't know what they wanted to do any better than they did when they began. That's not a good situation, but you can actually use it to your advantage if you do be smart about it. I actually think it improves the quality of work you get after you start. And I know that Professor Strebe doesn't always agree with me with this, but one of the nasty little secrets about law firms is that associates feel that partners have all the power. Actually, it's not quite true. The market is a two-way market. Every year, a partner has a group of associates working for them. Their junior associates become senior associates, and their senior associates become of counsel or partners. And so they actually can't assign work to the junior associates, or the senior associates that should be done by junior associates. So they actually have to reinvent their pool of associates every 3 years. In my experience, even good associates, partners are always trolling for good associates. And whenever I worked for other partners, they would always try to steal me from the partner I worked for. And what you discover is even when the whole office was thin on work, I was still billing over 2,000 hours. And what you discover is when you're good and in demand, actually you get better experience even if there isn't that much work in the firm. I actually think this is based on my experience at Hogan, now Hogan Levels, that partners, when looking for who to target first, targeted the clerks. Because there were a bunch of attorneys who fell out of the office after about a year, 2 years, because they just never found a place. That just didn't happen to people who were clerking just because they got better shots at the best work. You obtain a lifelong credential. The easiest way for me to see this, if you pull up the Martindale Hubble listing from someone who's very senior, a senior lawyer, and look at what they list from this time in their life, they'll list maybe a journal and their clerkship, and that's it. I mean, in terms of what you're setting yourself up, in terms of how this affects your whole career, this is the kind of experience that people prize and hang on to. An elite contact network, and as Dean Fitz mentioned, it gets better with age. You know, some people I clerked with are now getting big. Some have been deputy assistant attorney generals and assistant attorney generals. One is a Sixth Circuit judge. And it's amazing that, in fact, as you get older, it's not just the clerks that you are also clerk for your judge, but the people who are in the same courthouse with you at the same time get better and better as that goes. The most important reason, it's the best job that most of us feel we ever had. And that's the best reason of it all. So what are the myths? Clerkships are not just for top students. We can't place 84 students in the class just getting the top students. And a lot of people don't believe this. I actually think it's, what you'll get to in the recurring theme is it's a matter of fit. Is that there are a number of students from the top of the class who end up disappointed, and there's a number of students throughout the class who are surprised because they don't understand it's not your credentials that are going to bang through the door, it's the fact of finding someone where the judge is going to look at you and think they're a good fit. Why did my judge interview me? To be honest, he picked me out of the pile because I listed that I worked for the Special Olympics in high school, and he had a son that was organizing the Special Olympics for his high school, and that is why he interviewed me. That's an example of fit. All right? Clerkships are not just for litigators and future academics. We actually have presentations. Do we still post those? From the Wall Street guys who talk about extol the virtues of clerking. The kind of experiences, the kind of polish that this gives you is valuable no matter what you do. And particularly if you think about things like tax court and other things, they can be solid gold credentials, the one that mark you at the top. People think that, I hear people say, I don't want to clerk, I want to get going on my career. What I keep explaining to people is clerkships accelerate your career, they don't delay it. Because if you think that going to a firm for a year and doing document review and memos is accelerating your career, I got news for you. The interesting point I would tell you is you need to go long with your career decisions, particularly your early career decisions. And people get just thinking, oh, you know, I'm going to make, you know, this much less money. What you don't realize is that if you want these kinds of experiences, it's never going to get cheaper. It's never going to get easier. And this is the time early in your careers to make the kind of investments that are going to actually carry you and leverage your career and make you a better lawyer in the long run. And there's stories I can tell you about my friends who went to government work for the same reasons, and they actually spent 3 years for the government and leapfrogged every associate in my office because they actually had real experience and they could actually market to clients and develop real expertise to the people they were serving. And so I really believe this because I've seen so many people make short-sighted decisions based on the short run, and they realize that they're backing into decisions they're not happy in the long run. Great clerkships exist outside of outside of big cities. The two stories I always tell, there's a friend of mine who clerked in Reno, Nevada. He climbed rocks for 3 months, you know, and enjoyed the great outdoors. He skied 60 to 70 days that year in Tahoe. He ate at cheap casinos in Reno at, you know, roast beef for $5.99 and had a great year. And cost of living was really affordable on the clerkship salary. Never regretted it. I had another friend who clerked in Maine for a year. Had a fantastic experience. Now, these aren't places that, you know, if you're just doing the short list you think of. It's actually a wonderful, great thing. It's a great opportunity. Many people get hypnotized by a judge's prestige or philosophy. One of the most prestigious clerkships in the country for years was with Henry Friendly. There was a guy who didn't fit with him. He actually spent an entire career trying to overcome his clerkship with Friendly because it just wasn't a good fit. There's other judges, you know, who challenge people, and as long as they get along with you, that's the most important thing. They can be fantastic experiences in ways that people don't appreciate. And I think that you need to think broadly about it as you can. applying for clerkships is not like on-campus recruiting. We'll talk about this more in the how-to presentation we'll do later on. In on-campus recruiting, once you've passed the threshold, it's about avoiding negatives. In these kinds of elite interviews, and clerkships are just the first of many you're going to do for the rest of your life, it's a given that enough people are going to pass the minimum threshold. It's about not avoiding negatives, it's about putting positives on the table. And we'll help you learn how to do that. What should you be doing now? You really need to deepen, the key for you is to deepen your relationships with potential recommenders. That's the most actionable thing you can do now. I actually consciously wanted to clerk, and I thought about this. And there were days when I wanted to go home and I was tired. I made myself go to office hours. I wanted to go home and watch Friends on TV. And those little things where there's a question I had about class. You don't want to go talk about the weather, but something. If you're legitimately interested in the subject matter, if you're not legitimately interested in the subject matter, you're not the student you should be clerking anyway. But there's some day I just a little dragging a little bit. Said, you know what? There's a little thing about hate crimes, hate speech statutes. I wanted to talk about my First Amendment professor. I went and talked to him about it, and you know what? Those kinds of relationships really matter. The worst thing is, you go to a person in the summer between your second and third year, it's like, you may not remember me, but I had you first semester, first year in a class of 100 people, and I haven't spoken a word to you since. Would you write me a recommendation for clerkships? Don't be the student. We will do it because it's the threshold criteria, but you're missing. Not the least of which you're missing the opportunity of what this school offers, which is the professors are remarkably accessible. Seminars, research assistantships, independent research and writing, note supervision, and in fact, I would be thinking not just of one chance, but multiple chances to get to know professors, because the first thing judges ask me is, what's their research and writing like? And the answer that I graded a blind exam in a class of 60 students is not a great answer to that question. So, and the deeper you can make this with multiple professors and with the same professors, the better. Network with former clerks. There's a whole group of 3Ls in this building who've been through what you're about to go through and know in great detail all the vagaries of the modern clerkship process. And if you're targeting a city, I would go talk to them. Alumni, people in your summer jobs, I would never pass up an opportunity to do it. Faculty you've clerked, there's a faculty clerkship committee who's more than happy to talk to you about it. And we all have different targets, and it's a question of how you want to think about it. I would encourage you to avail yourself of all those resources. The bottom line is, I think this is a fantastic experience. I agree with Dean Fitz wholeheartedly. I think that there is a clerkship for every student who wants one. It's just a matter of being smart about how you target them and figuring out what you want, and that's what we're here to help you do. Every year, regularly, over 50%, usually 60 to 70% of our students who seek clerkships get them. I think that this is not a pipe dream. This is a very realistic opportunity. It's not the kind of thing you can wade into just like, well, I think I'll just throw out some applications. But if you work, we have the resource. We have a fantastic CPP that really sets our students up for success. And that we're ready to help you. And if this is something you want to do, we're committed to actually making this helping you make this happen. All right? Professor Stewart.
Well, I second everything that Professor you just said. So I have the easy task in this presentation. I could just say, well, what he said. And basically that is true. I clerked for an appellate judge, as did Professor Yu. I also interned for a federal district judge, and both of them were wonderful experiences. And I would say for the one else, think about if you can afford to not make any money this coming summer, think about interning for a judge as a possible summer job. It can give you a better sense of what judges do and clerks do, and it can also give you more diversity in your experience. If you intern at one level and clerk at another, that can be very nice. Professor Yu mentioned that I quibble with his account of how he got better work because he had clerked, and I actually think that here's my quibble about what you getting better work, because I think you would have gotten better work anyway. So you didn't need that credential to get it. Two other things. My real quibble with that account is I worked at a firm where they could have cared less, right? Whether you clerked or whether you didn't clerk. You look at the partners there, some clerked, some didn't, no one cared. It was, how was your work? If I had gotten there after my clerkship and been a screw up, I wouldn't have gotten any work. So, you know.
Cravath is a pretty distinctive place.
Okay, fair enough. It could, yes, I won't quarrel with that. I loved it there. But I also will say, the reason I wasn't a screw up when I got there was because I clerked. That is to say, I had very little experience in conventional business type settings after, when I emerged from law school. And my judge gave me training that I badly needed about how to handle a job and handle tasks and approach tasks and how to be prepared when I took a problem to someone I was working for. These are things that were not strengths of mine when I started the clerkship, and by the time that I emerged from the clerkship, they were. So, everything else that followed, I owe in a great part to my judge, who also is an amazing judge and person. So I think if you get better work after your clerkship, it may in fact be partly because your clerkship has made your work better. It certainly was true for me. In terms of the list of things that you can be doing now, I absolutely second what Professor Yu had to say. I would highlight one other thing that his list of good activities will help you do, and that is generate a good writing sample when it comes time to apply. So all of a sudden, it's going to be the spring of your 2L year, and you realize that you need a piece of writing that will highlight your strengths for your clerkship application. And just think about what a judge is going to look for. It's doctrinal analysis, so your ability to tackle a legal issue, research it, find an answer, or find that one doesn't exist, and write it all up clearly, accurately, persuasively, with good grammar and punctuation. And when you choose your seminar paper topic, what does that tell you? It tells you well, at least you might factor this in if you'd like. If you're allowed to choose a doctrinal topic for a seminar, think about doing that, because that is going to be a good writing sample for a clerkship in a way that a wonderful paper about a deconstructionist analysis of some general legal theory issue will not be a good writing sample. It will scare most judges. So, in any event, not that I have any quarrel with doing theoretical work in seminars. I support it. But you might consider you want to emerge from this with a good writing sample at some point, and that's something to think about. One other thing, if there are any transfer students among the 2Ls in this audience, if you're there, I know you're really talented, and every year we have wonderful applicants who transfer from other law schools. Just to highlight, that last list of things to do is particularly salient to you, because we want to get to know you guys, and we have 1 year less in which to do it, so help us out. And on that note, I want to turn things over to our shall we do our current law clerk presentations? And I want to thank Rory and Teresa for being willing to come in and give us their wise counsel.
Alright, so I guess we'll just introduce ourselves first. I'm Rory Schneider, just graduated from Penn Law this past May with Teresa, and I clerk for Judge Marguerite Rendell on the 3rd Circuit here in Philadelphia.
My name's Teresa Gu, and I clerk for Judge LaGrone Davis in the Eastern District, so at the district level.
Is there any focus questions?
Well, we can open for questions too, but what was your experience searching for the clerkship, and how do you find the initial days?
The experience searching for the clerkship is hectic, but not as scary as it might sound now sitting where you are. Because we've all done applications, and it's like any other application in the sense of putting the paperwork together, but I think at least my success in obtaining the clerkship I got, it was from not what was on the paper, like in my packet that I submitted, but the things that you wouldn't be able to tell from those materials. In particular, the recommenders. Frankly, I think I got my clerkship based on a call that a professor made for me. Those types of things are just so critical, because at least speaking from my own experience, judges like to have someone that they trust saying, I know this person, I will vouch for them. And my judge told me that that was sort of what put me ahead of anyone else who were as well qualified as I was. But I think the hardest part was just narrowing down on a list of judges, which can seem scary because there's a lot of them. So just to give you sort of an idea of how I went about it, I started with whether I wanted to do trial or appellate. I have an interest in going into academia, and I sort of like even though I probably will litigate for a little bit, I do sort of like the more abstract legal questions as opposed to sort of on the ground motions practice, stuff like that. So I sort of knew I wanted to do an appellate clerkship. So I narrowed it down by that, and then I did sort of a geographic pairing. But then after talking to one of my recommenders, he really advised me to only apply to those judges with whom I would have a really great experience. And so that required me to get in touch with a lot of past clerks or people who were familiar with certain judges, and really base my selection on those evaluations. So I probably narrowed it down to a list of maybe 60 judges with whom I knew I would have a solid experience, and that if offered the clerkship, I would, without a doubt, accept it.
So the process, I would say, was a whirlwind. It's unlike anything you've ever experienced before. Basically, you have, everything happens in a span of a few days. You get calls, I think it's a week beforehand, before you start the interviews, and you have, 4 or 5 interviews a day perhaps. You're traveling, like, I know Rory traveled and I traveled as well. I flew out to Ohio the day before interviews were supposed to start, and then I was in New York on the day interviews started, and then I was back in Philadelphia the day after. So it's a very hectic time, and it's an extremely condensed schedule. And it's not altogether relaxing while you're actually undergoing the clerkship interviewing process. But that said, I think it was completely worth it. And I'm enjoying myself to an extent that I didn't expect when I first applied. As far as the clerkship goes, everything Professor Yu said is absolutely correct. Basically, here I am, fresh out of law school, and what do I know? And my judge is telling me, look at these motions for summary judgment and tell me what you think, and then we'll talk about it, and then you can write the opinion. It's kind of crazy to me, the amount of responsibility you get, the amount of respect that your judge treats you with, the different issues that you have, the breadth and the depth with which you evaluate those issues. And it's just, if you take a step back and you look at it, you can, maybe have something close to this amount of responsibility at a law firm when you've been working there, 6 years. Or you can clerk and really have that kind of responsibility, for which you may or may not be qualified, but which will be given to you right off the bat. So I thought it was like a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think, again, for sure worth it. Not scary, a little hectic, but definitely worth it. It's sort of the takeaway when you leave here. Just to sort of, I guess, give it a contrast, I'm drafting opinions on issues of like national import right out of law school, and I could never have imagined being given that responsibility at my age or at my level of education. And yeah, the judges really value your opinions. They, want you to disagree with them, and it's really an invaluable experience as far as I'm concerned, just developing, the way you analyze issues, the way you write things, not even just opinions, but memos and emails even. I draft emails from my judge to other judges about opinions they've circulated. All of those things, even though a clerkship seems really outside of the realm of, regular practice at a firm or government work, they are developing skills that you'll definitely draw upon when you do get to sort of normal practice of law.
And I will add one more thing, because I know Rory did a little pitch for the appellate clerkship, so I'll do my corresponding pitch for the district court clerkship. In that I think it's really practical, and this is what you're probably going to be doing at a firm. You'll be researching these issues, you'll be, writing motions. For example, I started September 6th, and my judge has had 2 trials so far, and we have another trial starting this week. So, if you're interested in that, if you're interested in potentially, not even just doing trial work, but just actual litigating, you'll see that on a day-to-day basis in a district court clerkship. You'll be in and out of court, you'll be meeting with attorneys, doing conferences, and it's not as abstract and it's definitely not as theoretical, but you definitely do decide new questions of law. I wrote an opinion which was cited by a few blogs, and a few law firms did like their client summaries on it, and I was very excited about that. But you will be looking at new and emerging questions of law, so it's not as if it's not as theoretically interesting. I think it's just a question of what you're interested in learning and what you think will best suit your style and best prepare you for your future.
I would not pitch an appellate clerkship if you are not somewhat of like a recluse, I guess, as bad as it sounds. I mean, sitting in our chambers it'll be a vastly different experience. I mean, I sit in my office and most days go by without my phone ringing or really responding to almost any emails. It's spent reading briefs and writing either bench memos or draft opinions or other types of memos. So if that's not something that you think you can stay engaged in, then the appellate level may not be, your cup of tea. And so it just really depends. I'm trying to think of other things I would advise. You have a question?
I got two.
Before I do want to emphasize one thing Laura said. The nasty little secret about clerking, and I promise to be blunt, is there's now an online application process. Judges used to get 200 applications and now getting 1,500. They're not reading anymore. The only way you get your application read is by having someone make a call. And our faculty is fully committed and very aggressive about this. We can't do that unless we know who you are. So all the 1Ls, I really encourage you, there is an optimal number of seminars to take. It's probably, it's not 4, but it's probably not 0. It allows you to spread out your, you don't have 4 exams at the end, there's grade inflation in seminars. I mean, there's all these other terrible things, it's true. And frankly, I tell my students, there are A's for effort in seminars. Sometimes, if you work really hard. So there's a lot of compelling reasons to do that. But not the least of which is, it gives you a chance for a professor to say, with confidence, they know your research and writing skills and can talk about that. Second, our most successful candidates have really used their first year summers well. They have built those. If you have lunch or breakfast or coffee with a different attorney every week this summer, when you'll have a lot of free time, you will come back with a contact network that will be as good, if not better, than someone who had 3 generations of parents being lawyers. If you really work, and it doesn't take much except just picking up the phone, call a bunch of Penn alums or people in their firm and start to get to know more and more about whether it's clerking or what you want to do for the rest of your life. All right, go ahead.
So, despite Professor Struby's advice, I'm taking a seminar with her husband and writing the most theoretical paper. So I'm curious if either of you used your KEDI piece for your application, and secondly, if you did a first-year internship with a judge, how were you able to? My experience with my judges was that they were very touchy about directly recommending me or anything of that nature. How did you use those relationships in the clerkship application?
So I can answer both of those. I did not use my KEDI brief as my writing sample. I had published a comment, which I knew would be the most polished piece of writing that I had available on a very current topic, so I did use that. But again, I don't know that I would suggest that for all clerkship applications. I would not have used that had I been applying for district court clerkships, for example. Although it was doctrinal analysis, there was theoretical aspects to it. And so it's hard. So I would suggest actually potentially using different writing samples depending on the applications you're sending out. Even among judges, even appellate judges, you'll hear some prefer, shorter pieces or less theoretical pieces. Some really like academic work. So getting that inside information, like as Professor Yu is suggesting doing through talking to people, will really allow you to evaluate what the best piece of writing you have. But I think bottom line is you want it to be the most polished and presentable, clear piece of writing that you have available. So if that means putting in the extra work for 2 pieces, then I would do that rather than just say, oh, I have this one, let's just send that in because I submitted it elsewhere. As far as judicial internships, I did one in the Southern District of New York for my first summer. My judge told us flat out that he would not recommend people straight out, but he did offer to act as a reference. And I know for a fact that the 2 appellate judge interviews that I had, or 3, all called him because his name and his number were on right on my cover letter, and I think that was probably the first thing they did as far as deciding whether to give me an interview. So that's something that I would definitely ask your judge if he'd be willing, he or she would be willing to do.
I'll just add to that, I did not use my Keating brief. I do not think it was my best piece of legal writing by any stretch of the imagination. I used a brief that I wrote for appellate advocacy, and I thought that that was especially good for a district court clerkship because it really, it had very clear issues, very clear reasoning, and it was persuasive. So I think that's basically what they're looking for, and that's what they're used to reading. I did submit it for appellate clerkships, but if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have submitted a different piece of writing for the appellate clerkships because I think they're 2 very different creatures, and they're looking for different things. So if you at all have 2 pieces of writing, I would do that. And I did not intern for a judge my first summer. I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, so I can't speak to your second question.
And just quickly, Professor, you mentioned taking seminars. I highly recommend that. I had great recommenders, and I took 2 classes with both of them. Attended office hours, but they were lecture classes. They were not seminar classes. So there is no doubt that they were less able to speak to my writing and research skills than more just, how engaged I was in class and things like that, which are important. But if I were to go back and do it again, I would probably enroll in seminars with them to sort of complement. I had taken a lecture with them, and then I could, submit a piece of writing for their evaluation, which I couldn't do through a lecture with, an exam. It's just not the same. So you all have the benefit of this information now, so you can, look for people, professors that you've sort of established relationships with that are teaching seminars, all of which will be interesting, I'm sure, and, really try to fit them into your schedule.
I will add the caveat that one judge that I interviewed with, and I didn't take that many seminars, I had a lot of very straightforward lecture courses. One judge actually commented on the fact that I wasn't taking, that I was actually taking real classes. So I think that you have to balance your seminar with the fact that you actually want to be taking classes that teach you the basics in the law.
As far as classes that are important in that regard, I don't know if you have any. I think federal courts they like to see it on the transcript in my experience. I think of others. There's not really.
No, I think admin might be helpful, but I didn't take it. So.
Oh, evidence.
Evidence is helpful, I guess.
Evidence, right?
There's another question back here.
Federal courts. Yeah, I want to know, so a lot of the news now is the whole scheduling and when people should apply. And if you follow the dates, then it's not really to your advantage. So, Rory and Teresa, if you guys want to talk about that, and maybe CPP and Professor Yu, what your advice is on that, and if you can turn a blind eye to the schedule or follow.
Blind eye is such an ugly word.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience when I was doing it at least, I was under the impression that, particularly because my recommenders were both, or 2 of my recommenders were on the clerkship committee, that they would be less amenable to sort of doing things outside of the set dates that they had. And so I didn't even attempt to do it, even though some people suggested if there's particular judges you might be interested in, try to get an application earlier. I did not do that. I mean, whether it worked to my disadvantage or not, I mean, clearly you do miss opportunities because you'll watch, even when you're like almost ready to submit your applications, you'll realize you have applications ready, and then a clerkship is gone. Like there's no more opportunity. So there, things do move quickly. But I mean, I guess from an institutional standpoint, I thought it better to respect sort of, the restrictions that I thought had been placed on how I do things, and for my recommenders to know that I was respecting, how they went about it. So I wouldn't change it, but if, the law school now is more amenable to doing that, I don't think that it will, work to your disadvantage by any means, so.
My understanding of it is that I think it's largely dependent on where you're applying. I know I applied SDNY, which is New York, and EDPA, and I think I did some DC, and all of the judges in those areas followed the plan. So I followed the plan. I think Ninth Circuit is a little laxer, more lax with the deadline. So I didn't have a problem because of where I was applying. But I think that if you were applying in an area where judges traditionally go in advance of the plan, it might be prudent to inquire about that.
Right, yeah.
Okay. The plan, just so you don't know, is applications get delivered the day after Labor Day. Invitations to interview are not supposed to happen until the Friday after that. And then that's the invitation, and then the interviews actually happen a week after that, roughly, and they'll be all laid out for you. And the school has been, this is done by the Judicial Conference, and we've been one of the major supporters. We are firmly embracing the plan. Alumni are not bound by the plan. They can apply early. So I would encourage you, if this doesn't work out for you in the year you're 3L, you're open to, I would encourage you to make this work in your advantage the next year, because if it's worth doing, it's worth doing. Now, that said, two things are going on. Several judges and some courts have openly said they are not complying with the plan. Okay? Second, we are talking with other law schools and finding out that their interpretation of what the guidelines requires is different from our interpretation of what the guidelines requires. So we are actively discussing our policy and are committed to making sure that we will do everything we can to make sure our students are under no more disadvantage than any other law school that is adhering to the plan. And so I think there's probably more leeway without committing to anything than we probably interpreted last year. But I do think there's a way that we can remain committed to the plan, support the initiative, which only works for the benefit of students. Because if this plan collapses, the 3L class, the graduating class before me didn't have a plan in place. They put one in for mine. Students would hear in September without knowing who else is going to call. And then they accepted a clerkship, and they find out like 60 days later someone else invites them to interview for someone that they wanted to, and then they'd already accepted. And so they felt really bad about it. The plan really does work in your best interest. Imagine now without deadlines. Okay, it's really, really ugly. So this is why we're trying to make this work. But we want to make sure that it does continue to work for you, and we certainly are going to do everything we can to make sure that no Penn student is disadvantaged against any other law school graduates because we're interpreting the plan more strictly.
Be careful exactly what we say. The agreement is an agreement of the deans of 10, 12 law schools. And it's in, as Christopher says, it's in everyone's interest that this plan work. It advantages law students, it advantages judges, and so institutionally we are committed to making it work, and we are, I am a member of the group of judges, deans and judges who set this up. That having been said, we're also committed to supporting Penn law students in getting clerkships, and we don't want you to be disadvantaged. So we are looking very carefully exactly what the rules are, what we can and can't do, and supporting you. And so this is sort of almost a monthly process of trying to figure out and how this is being implemented. So, stay tuned.
And just quickly to add, I know it may have gone sort of unnoticed, but they said that alumni are not bound by the plan. And so if anyone is, I didn't really consider this, I knew that I wanted to do my clerkship right after having graduated. But, you know, the application process is a lot simpler for people who do it outside the plan, i.e. alumni. So if anyone has reservations about whether or not they want to do clerkships or are looking for some of the more competitive ones, which I've found a lot of judges are not do not go by the plan. I know plenty of people who, you know, use the year after law school to do their applications outside the plan, and you can do it sort of piecemeal. You know, if there are particular judges you're most interested in, you can apply to those first and see what happens and sort of go by that. So if any of you are sort of in that situation, don't lose sight of the fact that you can always apply after as well.
By the way, that includes spring of your third
Right.
year.
Are there any 3Ls here?
Exactly.
But if you think about it, it means in the spring semester, your third year, you can be applying outside this restriction for a clerkship starting a year after you graduate.
Actually, they can be applying now. Some
Right.
people
Who's
apply
applying now?
Right.
Do you think that should affect your initial application choices then? I mean, and does that all play into the way that you should think about the first round of applications if, you know,
Yes.
yeah, that would so happen?
This is a very strategic process. A great outcome for you would be 4 interviews in 1 job. This is not like other job processes. And so making sure you target people who are likely to look on your application well, that you have fit with, they're like, you know, is everything here. And so, you know, people will throw out just a bunch of applications and they'll end up with nothing. Because if you don't have a shape, you don't fit anywhere. And knowing more about how you're targeting and how you sell yourself and putting over the overall gestalt is how you really make the whole bit into something nice.
Nothing? No? All right.
And we scared you to death. You know, I think this is a fantastic opportunity. I'll tell you one thing that just occurred to me. If you clerk, you will never look at the judicial system with the same way again. You know, the reason I said this, I remember I used to think opinions were like holy writ. And then when you see cases, you can see from the same chambers, opinions are better or worse depending on which clerk worked on them. And what you realize is that the judiciary is just an institution made up of people, very well-meaning, public-spirited people trying to do the right thing. But it's one of those things where the law becomes much more alive and flexible, and you realize that there's a huge dynamic component to it that actually changes the way you think about the law. And so I think that it's a fantastic experience. I hope all of you pursue. And I thank you all for coming.
And we'll wait back if you guys have more.